All right, so we're essentially done talking about single cells. Well, tomorrow we're going to do something about the size of single cells, but okay, we're essentially done getting taught about, okay, single cells. Now we're going to look at cells cooperating, cells working together as a fully functioning multicellular organism. Okay, now there's basically two different kinds of multicellularity. There's truly multicellular organisms like ourselves, and then there are colonial organisms, and that is colonies of cells where all the cells are identical. Okay, the difference between a true multicellular organism and a colony of cells is this: specialization. We're going to get back to it. Yeah. Sometimes I teach things in different order. I should really renumber this because I've taught it in this order like for the last 5 years. Just made more sense. Okay, so specialization. Specialization happens in eukaryotic organisms because we have organelles in our cells. And that means that cells can become good at doing a certain job based on the structure of their cells. So every cell in my body, or every type of cell in my body, is a little bit different. Okay? The cells in my heart are different from the cells in my liver. Okay, because the cells in my heart are mostly muscle, okay, with some conducting nerve fibers kind of put in there, and the cells in my liver are mostly designed to detoxify poisons and clean my blood. Okay, very, very different. My liver isn't constantly going pump, 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 which is a good thing because that'd be really weird. It's quite large. Okay, whereas my heart is constantly, hopefully, pumping. Okay, because that's pretty important. Okay, and so they have to have very different cellular structures in order to do those jobs. They are specialized to do a certain job. Okay, now we're also going to look a little bit at how multicellularity evolved, and we're going to take a little bit of time to talk about how what you learn in religion class isn't any different than what I'm going to teach you. Okay, the whole creation idea is totally scientifically supportable. Okay, as long as you don't take the scripture literally, which of course it is never meant to be taken. Okay, so if you're reading Genesis, in the beginning, if you're taking that literally, everything I say to you, you're going to hate. All right, and you're just going to have to deal with that. Okay, because Pope Francis himself said there are certain parts of the Bible that are not meant to be taken literally; they are figurative. Genesis is one of those books. Okay, a lot of it is meant figuratively. Okay, so we're going to talk a bit about that as well. Okay, so this is one of the big parts. Okay, understand the role of specialization in multicellularity, and we're going to look at the leaf as a prime example of that because you just looked at it under the microscope yesterday, right? So you'll see the different kinds of cells. Okay, and look at the plant as an example of a multicellular organism. Okay, so multicellularity evolved actually a bunch of different times, okay, in separate branches of the kind of tree of life, so to speak. Okay, so it evolved a bunch of different times. A lot of the groups went extinct and a lot of the groups persisted. Okay, essentially we have several different groups of multicellular organisms. We have the plants, the animals, and the fungi. Okay, those are the three groups that have kind of persisted over time from an evolutionary perspective. Okay. Why would multicellularity evolve more than once in different groups? Yeah, multicellularity allows organisms to be successful. It is a major advantage in most situations over being a single cell. Okay, mostly because it allows cells to overcome the one stumbling block they have: size. Okay, this is what the activity tomorrow is going to be about. But the major stumbling block for a single-celled organism is size. Once they reach a certain size, what doesn't work well enough anymore? Cellular transport process. Which one? Diffusion, right? Okay, remember, diffusion works great over short distances, like when a cell is small. But if a cell gets too big, diffusion isn't fast enough, accurate enough, okay, or basically they can't just produce enough stuff for diffusion to accurately get it where it needs to go, the larger a cell becomes. However, if you become multicellular, you overcome that problem. You can be made up of many very small cells that don't have a problem with diffusion, but you as a whole organism can be big. Okay, and under most evolutionary situations, bigger is better. Okay? Not all, but under most, bigger is better. Otherwise, there wouldn't have been a trend towards larger. Okay, and generally speaking, evolutionarily speaking, the trend was bigger, bigger, bigger. Okay, there were a few cases where big was bad, dinosaurs. Okay, they had a good run though. Okay, they really did. Okay, but being big and cold-blooded really kind of did them in the end. All right. Yes, cells are tissue and cells are connected. Like, yes, we're made of separate cells, but the cells, they form tissues that are connected cells. Yeah, not connected in the way that they can directly pull material, but connected fibrously. Well, they don't necessarily have the same parts. They have some of the same parts, but they have the same parts in different numbers. Okay, like we said, like a muscle cell has way more cytoskeleton stuff in it and mitochondria than does a liver cell. In fact, a muscle cell is multinucleate, which means it has more than one nucleus. Okay, the reason for that is you're constantly tearing them. Okay, so they need to have a nucleus everywhere, several of them inside the cell, so that when it breaks, all the parts, broken parts, can reform and pull the cell back together. Okay? So it's mostly about the structure and generally the structure. How much and in what ways do the parts of the cell work in that cell, right? Whereas a liver cell is like all smooth ER and almost no cytoskeleton. Okay, so if we're looking back in the history of the Earth here, okay? First thing is, let there be light. Okay, so let there be light, I think, could easily explain Big Bang. I'm assuming pretty bright. Okay, yeah, okay. Fairly large explosion creating the entire universe as we know it, probably pretty bright. Okay, now, the first things to form after the Big Bang would have been, well, there's lots of hydrogen atoms out there, things like that. Hydrogen atoms combine to form stars. Yeah, the earliest stars were actually very, very large. Okay, there's a trend towards smaller stars as the universe ages. Okay, so that's the first thing. Then separating the Earth from the sky. Okay, so we start getting, smaller objects, not so much stars, but maybe still smaller things like planets starting to form. Okay, and then land from the sea. Okay, then the atmosphere begins, or the rock cools enough that an atmosphere forms around it. Precipitation falls, continuing to cool the molten surface so that liquid water can exist on the surface, and so on and so on. Really, okay, everything that we know from the fossil record and observations and scientific knowledge, okay, supports the exact order in which it happens in the Bible. Okay, there's virtually no disagreement there, even though everyone wants to tell you that there is. Okay, well, the non-religious types want to tell you that there's all this disagreement, when really there's a lot of harmony between science and what's in the Bible. Okay, believe it or not, there's a lot of that. Okay, Pope Francis, you know what he did before, one of his jobs was before he became a priest and then a cardinal and whatever else? Yeah, he's a chemist. Okay, he's a science guy. He's got a background in hard science. Okay, so he's one of those guys that can really help to explain all this. And he actually had a big, long speech about how science and religion are not the mortal enemies that everyone perceives them to be. Yep, and a monk who came up with the idea of genetics. Gregor Mendel was a monk. Yeah. Yes. Yes, it was brought. Yeah, when you pulverize any material that you find out in space, asteroid, comet, whatever, there's water in it, and so that water, when it struck, there would be gases around this ball. I know it shows that there's no gases here, but there would have been gases around this ball that would have been there. And there's various periods where the Earth was bombarded more heavily than others. Like, they're actually called like the late heavy bombardment and the early heavy bombardment and then the light bombardment. There's all these different times in Earth's history where it got smoked a whole bunch of times by large objects. Okay, one of the last ones is actually the impact that created the moon. Okay, Earth got hit by another planet that crossed its orbit, probably about Mars sized. Okay, and we're talking like 4 billion years ago or something like that. Okay, long time ago. But it wasn't a direct hit, it was more of kind of a glancing blow. It destroyed the smaller object completely, re-liquefied the Earth, okay, and all the debris that from that glancing blow arced out and was captured and coalesced into the moon. Okay, the evidence we have for that is the rock samples brought back to Earth from the Apollo missions. Okay, the material the moon is made out of is very similar to the surface of the Earth. Okay, but not the core of the Earth. That's why we think it was a glancing blow, stripped off the surface more than the core. Okay. Yeah.
Once the Earth has created an atmosphere, could it have created water like a much reaction from like rocks?
Well, there's not so much combustion going on here. It's just that the Earth is hot because it's being hit all the time, right? Like when you have an impact, it makes everything molten in that area. Well, if the Earth's getting hit all the time, it's still very hot, so it has to cool. Okay, and as it continues to cool, the crust will get thicker, right? And down into I mean, that's kind of what's happened with Mars. Mars cooled more quickly than the Earth. It doesn't have the same kind of internal structure that Earth does, at least not as molten. Okay. Okay, so over the course of time, Earth changes, okay? Now we know about 4 billion years ago, maybe even a little bit more than 4 billion years ago, the first evidence of life appears in the fossil record, okay? All of this would have been where? In the ocean. Life was in the ocean life on land is actually fairly recent, okay, geologically speaking. All right, so we've got very simple kind of cyanobacteria type organisms. Those are prokaryotes, okay, kind of like photosynthetic bacteria, really. Okay, would have been about the first things that would have appeared as like real cells in life. Okay, and that persisted for quite a while. Here's the thing though, Earth's atmosphere at this time is very, very different. Okay, it is toxic compared to what it is today. Ammonia, carbon dioxide, other types of complex molecules, but very little free oxygen. Okay, so these types of organisms do just fine. They're in the water and they're absorbing the carbon dioxide. They're turning it into sugars through the process of photosynthesis, and they're releasing oxygen. Okay, these things caused the first mass extinction on Earth, because there were other organisms around that were thriving because of the toxic conditions. They actually consumed and used for fuel the other molecules that were present. Okay? As oxygen started to build up in the water, it also started to bubble into the air, okay? Helping to change both the composition of the atmosphere as well as the concentration of oxygen in the water. Eventually, it got to the point where the oxygen levels got so high, they became toxic to a lot of the life on Earth. And a lot of the life on Earth died, only because some life was producing toxic material. Okay, could have easily gone the other way. All right, so anyway, we start getting oxygen building up, more complex life starts to form. There's enough organic material starting to be around now for things that are not photosynthetic to maybe have a chance and start moving around and consuming food. Okay, but you can see the Earth isn't getting bigger here, by the way. It just looks that way. Okay, but the Earth is becoming more and more complex. Okay, 2.1 to 1.1 billion years ago, oxygen's continuing to build. There's still large single-celled organisms, but the first multicellular organisms appear in the fossil record here. Okay, so it took more than half of Earth's history before the first simple multicellular organisms appear. Okay, so it's not a quick process by any stretch. Well, I mean, it all depends on where that, what conditions are there. We're just fortunate that the evolutionary line Earth took led to us. Okay, now it had guidance. That's of course what we believe as Catholics. But okay, this was all part of a grand plan, and that's again where that's the real kind of headbutt between science and religion. Oh, religion can't agree with evolution, and Pope Francis said, "Why not? Why can't they agree?" Okay. God creates all this. He has to know that his creation is not static. It's dynamic and it's going to change. If he wants the life he puts on here to survive, he has to give it the ability to do what? Adapt. Adapt to the changes. Adaptation and change lead to evolution. There's absolutely nothing wrong with the idea of evolution from a religious point of view. Okay? As long as you don't take the 6 days literally. Okay, if you take the 6 days literally, you hate everything I say, believe the earth is 5,000 years old, and okay, that's your belief. I don't believe that. Okay, I'm going to go with what Pope Francis says and what science says, and that the earth is almost 5 billion years old. Okay, and that this is the path that it has taken. Okay, you have to remember, when the Bible was written, most people were completely illiterate. Okay, they had no education. Okay, no background in science. Okay, science wasn't even really around. So if you were going around and telling people about the marvel of God's plan and creation and how over 5 billion years these kind of things evolved and stuff like that, they would have thrown rocks at you until you were dead. Okay, that's what stoning is. Okay, you hear about people getting stoned in the Bible. They didn't. Stoned meant they got rocks thrown at them, not the other kind of stone. Okay, okay, because people didn't have any education. And to the Jewish people, 7 days is a sacred amount of time. Okay? There's the Sabbath day, right? On the seventh day, God rested. Well, their whole kind of religion is based around this idea of 6 days. So it made sense to say God created the earth in 6 days. It's simple. It's a timeline they're familiar with. It's something that they'll accept because of their background. Okay, and it sounds pretty cool. All that happened in 6 days. I mean, that sounds great. Okay, but it was mostly written just so that people would accept the idea of here's how it happened. Okay, we know that 6 days was just a metaphor. Okay, for what really went on. It took a lot longer than that. Okay, it was never meant to be taken literally.
Didn't they make a recent discovery this year or something where they found that multicellular organisms could have existed before we thought?
Oh, probably. They're finding stuff in the fossil record all the time. Yeah. I mean, all it's saying is when they find something that's a little bit older is, okay, well, so the evolutionary process happened a little faster than we thought. Yeah. Another tick on the geological clock, right? Okay, so what you see here in this diagram as well, guys, is this blue line. And you see that it starts out very thin and gets thicker. Okay, what it represents is the diversity of life on Earth. That is, the numbers of different kinds of organisms, not the number of organisms, but the number of different kinds of organisms. Okay, and you can see that it gets it's a very linear progression here for a while, and then about 1 billion years ago, it just starts to widen, and then here around the Cambrian era, it explodes. Okay, the Cambrian era is really the start of the animals. Okay, the complex multicellular animals. And really once that happened, there were a lot of available niches for them to fill. It's niche, by the way. Okay, those of you who took it in French pronounce it as niche. That's not right. Okay, it's niche. Okay, niche, niche. Say it right. Yes, niche. Yes, niche. I don't know why people say niche, but it's niche. Okay. I don't care. It's niche. Say it right now. It's niche. Okay. No, it's niche. It is. Okay. No. Say it right. All right. Okay. So we got. Does everyone kind of follow this progression here? Okay. So that's my spiel on niches and evolution and religion altogether. All good stuff. Okay. Everybody gets along. Okay. So as I was saying before, what distinguishes a colonial organism, that would be this, okay, from a true multicellular organism is specialization. This is a colonial organism because every cell it's made up of is exactly the same. Okay, they all have a flagellum and a collar, and then most of the cell organelles would be in kind of this area here. So this is just its feeding structure. The flagellum would create a current that would bring food particles to the collar area where they stick or be absorbed into the cytoplasm, feeding the organism. The advantage of being together is if one of these is better at creating that or feeding or whatever, the nutrients and food can be shared between the cells. Okay, that's the advantage of being in a colony. It also gives you a bit of an advantage of size in that might intimidate certain small predators from eating you because you're just too big. All right. So that's a colonial organism. There's no specialization. A true multicellular organism has specialization. Okay, so evolution increased the cellular specialization. Okay, initially colonial aggregates like we just saw, all cells may have been motile. That means they had moving parts. Okay, with flagella. Okay, as cells in the colony tend to become increasingly dependent, some might have started to specialize. Okay, maybe one loses its flagella but becomes very good at processing food particles. Okay, and that could lead to over generations having a digestive tract. Okay, and another one was good at something else and became a circulatory system, whatever. Okay, that's kind of the, not really accurate, but that's sort of the process. Yes, that's how that happens. Yeah, genetic mutation occurs in one cell and it becomes able to do this. Yeah. Okay, guys, how often does a mutation lead to something better? Extraordinarily rarely. Okay, we are talking one fraction of 1% of mutations lead to something positive. Most mutations are negative. Okay, at least in terms of the effect they would have on the organism. Absolutely, evolution is completely a trial and error process. Yeah, and it's also luck. Okay, that mutation has to happen at the right time for it to be advantageous. Another million years down the road, that mutation isn't a good thing. Right. So, all right. So you can see in these pictures a couple of things that are different. The moon's giant in all these pictures because it was closer. The moon is slowly moving further away from the Earth at a rate of about 2 centimeters a year. Okay, and that's because of the way it was formed. It was formed by an impact. Okay, and that coalescing cloud is always slowly going away. You're not going to have to worry. We're not going to lose the moon anytime soon. Okay, but it is slowly moving away about 2 centimeters a year. That's a pretty small rate when you consider how big the moon and the Earth are, okay, and how far away they are from each other. All right, but it is slowly moving away. Well, again, that process will be so slow that there'll be adaptations to those changes over the course of time. Okay. Again, it was the fact that the moon was very close that allowed a lot of life to evolve because it made tidal pools that were very large. Right. The tidal range for places on Earth was huge because of where the moon was and how close it was. Okay. And they were much more frequent because the closer the moon is to the Earth, the faster it orbits. Right? So we only get like, was it 2 high tides and 2 low tides a day or something like that? Whereas when the moon was way closer, it could have been 9 or 10. Okay, because the moon would just be whipping around the Earth. Okay. But sometimes you need the refreshing of the water coming in, bringing more nutrients. If that's happening more often, right, you're getting that refreshing more often. Well, that process, though, took a very long time. The moon was already quite a bit further away by the time life was moving out onto Earth. Yeah. Well, it is now. You can see the moon during the day. Yeah. Like tonight, like I know when I went for my run this morning at 5, the moon wasn't up. Right. I do every morning. Yeah. Okay. So the moon wasn't up. It was really dark, and my headlamp battery ran out. That's why I made a note of the fact there was no moon because it was really dark. Okay. But yeah, so the moon isn't. I mean, it's up sometimes during the day, and it's up sometimes during the night. It's just the way it is. Okay. All right. Moving along here. Now, looking at cells within a plant that are specialized. We're only going to get to a couple of these. Okay. Within plants, there are some cells that are very specialized to do a job, and then there's a group of unspecialized cells. Okay, these unspecialized cells are called parenchyma or stem cells. Okay, this is where the term stem cell came from. Okay, within the plant, we have to have these unspecialized cells because a plant needs to grow new tissue all the time. Okay? I mean, yeah, we need to grow new tissue, but it's from the division of cells that are already there. A plant may need to grow a different kind of tissue. So inside the little buds that you see on a plant, there are a lot of parenchyma cells. Okay? They can become stem, root, leaf, whatever they need to become, okay, based on the needs of the plant. Okay, so they're unspecialized stem cells. Okay, and that's the advantage of stem cells if you're looking at like stem cell therapy for a person. You can take stem cells that aren't specialized to do anything yet, and under a certain stimulus, they'll become a certain type of cell. Okay, everybody with me there? Okay, now there's different kinds of stem cells in people, by the way. Okay, there's pluripotent stem cells, which you have in your body as a mature organism. And then there are the kind that are really good for all the types of like kind of miraculous stem cell treatments that people are using, and those are embryonic stem cells. Where do those come from? From an embryo. Yeah. So at a certain stage, the embryo hasn't specialized yet. So it's just a clump of unspecialized cells. But the cells within that embryo are destined to become certain things. And we know from studies of embryology what each cell group will become. We can harvest those cells and grow them into liver tissue, pancreatic tissue, and things like that. The problem is what happens to the embryo? It dies. Okay, and that's another thing that obviously we as Catholics have a problem with. That's why we have an issue with embryonic stem cell research. We have no problem with pluripotent stem cell research. Okay, you can get that from your own fat cells. Okay, and they can be used for that. All right, we'll leave it at that for today, guys.